Hi everyone, welcome back to the Robertson Media Center, UVA. Today we're going to continue our tutorial on DaVinci Resolve by discussing how to export your final file. Again, this video series is really intended for beginners and only covers enough to get started. So we're back here in DaVinci Resolve 16, and let's say that we've gone through all the videos and we have everything completely done and we are ready to turn this in. Well, not so fast. We can't actually turn in this work file. So if you come into DaVinci Resolve and you click Save, for instance, it's going to save a work file. And this is something that you can reopen in DaVinci Resolve, again, if you want to keep editing. But if you're completely done, you need to do what's called export or render. And these are terms that basically mean that you are taking everything that you've done and putting it in a file that you can open on just about anything. In this case, it's going to be an MP4 or an MOV. And that file type you could put up onto YouTube or Vimeo. You could hand in. Most professors might be expecting an MP4 or an MOV in terms of turning it in. Just make sure you check their directions if they have something specific that they want. You need to export. Now, the first way you can export is you can actually go up in the editing workspace. You can go up to File, Quick Export. Quick Export only gives you a few options, but it works really quickly. And especially if you just want to make a draft quick to see what it looks like on a different device or something like that, or send out a rough draft, this is the best way to do it. So again, in the editing workspace, go to File, Quick Export, and then you can just select one of these presets. You could use H.264 as a really quick setup, and you can see the settings here. They are not editable. So again, if you want something more specific, you're going to have to actually go to the Deliver workspace, which we'll talk about in a moment. But Quick Export's a great way to just get a file that's workable. So if I just hit Export, it's going to ask me where. I'll put this on the desktop and name it Memes1. And then it's going to render. And it's going to give me a file on the desktop that is perfectly okay to turn in. But you didn't get to customize or choose your specific settings, etc. So we'll go into, in a moment, the Deliver workspace. Now it says the render is complete. I can click Close, and then I can bring in my file, which I have right here. And if I press the spacebar on a Mac, what is a meme? Right, I have the file ready to go. And if I click on Get Info, you can see what kind of file it is. We've got 1920 by 1080, which is 1080p. It's a QuickTime movie, and as you can see, the extension is MOV. So this is what you would get out of the Quick Export menu. For exporting, DaVinci Resolve has an entire workspace built around exporting. And unless you just want to do the quick export and you want to do something a little bit more customized, I highly recommend that you go over to it. So from the editing workspace, which we spent most of our time in this video series, we can go all the way over here. This is the Deliver workspace. If I select it, you can see I have my render settings window over here. I have a preview window, and then I have my render queue. This is where you're going to add all of the different jobs that you want to queue. Essentially, if you have multiple timelines you'd like to export at once, you can list them all here and render them all at once. You have a few presets. Probably the most common is the YouTube 1080p preset that you have here. As you can see, it's HD, 30 frames per second, QuickTime, H.264. And this sets up a file that's perfectly acceptable for a YouTube upload. You can even, if you would like to upload directly, it would take you, you need to sign into YouTube then to do that. If you don't know what to export as, this is a great place to start. There's also Vimeo, which is something very, very similar, except basically that you can upload directly to Vimeo instead of YouTube. If you want a more generic file that works in more systems, you can go to the H.264 master. It's going to be a little bit larger file, but then you can also check and change these settings. At any of these, you can actually click on the resolution and choose a different one. So unlike the quick export, you have more options to choose from if HD, for instance, isn't the resolution that you're going for. With the free version of DaVinci Resolve, the highest resolution you can go to is the Ultra HD, which is 3840 by 2160 pixels, which is just short of 4K. If you are doing this professionally and you want the best possible file, but also the largest possible file, it makes it more difficult to transport. And again, if your professor doesn't ask for it, I would not turn in one of these. But you could go to the ProRes Master, and this is going to give you the most uncompressed file type that you have an option to use inside of DaVinci Resolve. And so you can choose that one. Just make sure again that it fits all of the resolution and the frames per second, all of that you have for your project. So I'll come back to YouTube. Here I can set my file name. I'll say memes 2. And I can choose a location. I click browse and I can choose desktop, for instance. And then I have my resolution, so HD. My project is 30 frames per second, so that's correct here. If yours is 24 or something, just make sure you select it. And since I chose the YouTube preset, the rest should be fine if my goal is to upload it to YouTube, which it is. So I'm going to keep those right where they're at. From there, I can click Add to Render Queue, and it's going to bring it up over here in the render queue itself. And you can see it has the name and location. The cool thing about the render queue is that if you wanted to add more than one project in here and render them all at once, or different versions of a draft, you could do that all in a single render instead of rendering it, coming back and starting the next render. So then I hit Start Render, and it's going to render the entire project and put it in the location that I asked it to put it. And now if you look up in the render queue, it says completed, and it gives the amount of time it took to complete it, which for this project was 23 seconds, pretty quick for a render. And then I can check on my desktop. And here I have it, Memes 2. This is the project that I've just exported. And you can see it came out as 170 megabytes, which is a little bit different than the Memes 1, which was the quick export that I did at 238 megabytes. Just different presets. So again, this is the file that you would be handing in as your final project, and not the save file for DaVinci Resolve that you can open in DaVinci Resolve. Again, if all those things get disconnected, whoever you're handing it off to cannot open it, most likely. And if they did want to open it, you'd have to create an archive, which I'll show you in just a moment. So let's say in that scenario, you want someone else to continue editing a project. It's a group project or something, and you need to transfer it to a different computer. I showed this before, but very quickly in review, if you go to File, Project Manager, it brings up that kind of opening splash page again, and here I can right-click and export project archive, and then when I take that archive, I can restore it in this window as well. That archive file, then you would hand off to whoever else or what other computer you're using to edit in DaVinci Resolve. Let's say at the end of my project here, I don't want this test 1 text. I want my project to end here. Or you've exported a file and 20 minutes of nothing, there's a little tiny clip at the end. Well, there's some sort of clip way out in the timeline that you don't want. I highly recommend that you create what's called an out point, and that out point will determine what exactly you want to export. So here I would click this button, Mark Out, or the keyboard shortcut O, and that's going to create an out point and say anything after that, I don't want to export. So you're basically telling the computer what section of the timeline you want to export. You can also create an in point. Let's say you have some sort of special effect that you're working with on this last portion. You could create an in point here, and you could export just this section of the project. And finally, if you're having trouble finding where your project ended up, sometimes if you didn't set the location correctly or something like that, you can actually just come right up to this render queue and select whichever export you did. It shows it right here, but you can also right-click and click Reveal in Finder, and that will bring up a Finder window with the project selected. Great, well that's everything we have on this video series on DaVinci Resolve. Thank you for watching.